I used to believe the hardest thing in life was learning how to walk again. I was wrong. The hardest thing was realizing I had to take my first steps without the person who promised he would always stand beside me. My name is Olivia Bennett, and before that year changed everything, I believed I knew exactly what my future looked like. I had a loving husband, a beautiful baby, and a home filled with plans for tomorrow. I thought the difficult moments we faced would only make our family stronger. I never imagined that the person holding my hand during my hardest days would be the same person who would eventually let go. The accident that changed my life did not just affect my body. It changed the way I saw the people around me. After months of treatment and rehabilitation, I was learning simple things all over again. Standing for a few seconds. Taking a few careful steps across the living room. Carrying my baby without needing someone beside me. Every small achievement felt like a victory. I remember one morning when sunlight came through the kitchen window, and I held onto the counter while slowly moving from one side of the room to the other. My daughter was watching me with a smile, and I felt proud. I thought that moment represented everything I had been fighting for. I thought my family would see my progress and feel hopeful with me. Daniel Bennett, my husband, used to tell me that we would get through anything together. During the early days of my recovery, those words gave me strength. When I felt frustrated, he reminded me to be patient. When I worried about the future, he told me we would figure things out. I believed him because he was my partner. It was the person I trusted most. But slowly, something began to change. Daniel became quieter. He spent more time away from home. Our conversations became shorter. At first, I convinced myself that he was simply struggling too. He understood that my recovery was difficult for everyone. He did not want to blame him. He wanted to believe we were just going through a challenging season. He focused on getting stronger. He focused on being the best mother I could be. He focused on creating a normal life for our daughter. Then one evening, while I was sitting in the living room after another long day of therapy exercises, Daniel sat across from me and said something I never expected to hear. It told me he did not know if he could continue with our marriage. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. He looked at him, waiting for him to explain that he was overwhelmed or that he needed time. But his expression told me this was something he had already decided. I remember looking at my daughter sleeping nearby and feeling a wave of sadness. Not because I wanted someone to stay out of obligation, but because I could not understand how someone could walk away when we were still rebuilding our lives. Daniel said he needed a different future. He said he felt like his life had changed too much. He listened quietly because I did not know what else to do. The person I thought would help me take my first steps was now telling me I had to continue without him. The days after Daniel left were some of the most confusing days of my life. He was still learning how to move comfortably. He was still adjusting to being a mother with new challenges. And now, I was learning how to rebuild a family that had already changed. But something happened during those difficult days. Slowly, I began discovering a strength I did not know I had. Every step I took was no longer just about recovery. It was proof that I could keep moving forward, even when the person I expected to be beside me was gone. He did not know what the future would bring. He did not know that Daniel would eventually come back into my life in a way I never expected. But I knew one thing. He had already taken the hardest step of all. He had started believing that I could stand on my own. I remember the first morning after Daniel left because the silence felt different. It was not the peaceful kind of silence I once enjoyed after my daughter fell asleep. It was the kind of silence that made me realize my life had changed overnight. He stood in the kitchen holding my coffee cup, looking at the empty chair where Daniel used to sit, and I had a moment where I wondered how I was supposed to handle everything alone. He was still recovering. He was still learning how to trust my body again. And now I was responsible for creating stability for my little girl while trying to rebuild my own life. But even in those first difficult weeks, I made a decision. I refused to let my circumstances become the definition of who I was. My recovery had already taught me something important. Progress does not happen all at once. It happens one small step at a time. I had learned that during physical therapy, and now I had to apply that same lesson to my entire life. My days became a careful routine. Every morning, I focused on taking care of my daughter and completing the exercises that helped me become stronger. Some days were easier than others. There were mornings when I felt proud because I could do things that had once seemed impossible. Other days, I felt exhausted and wondered if I would ever feel normal again. But every night, when I looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully, I reminded myself why I kept going. She deserved a mother who believed in the future. She deserved to grow up knowing that difficult moments could be overcome. During that time, I started noticing something about myself. Before everything happened, I had always depended on Daniel more than I realized. Not because I was incapable, but because I believed marriage meant facing challenges together. I believed that when one person struggled, the other person would step closer. I never expected that person to step away. But after Daniel left, I discovered abilities I had never recognized before. I learned how to manage responsibilities I once thought were too overwhelming. I learned how to ask for help when I needed it. I learned that being independent did not mean I had to carry everything silently. My family and close friends noticed the change too. My sister, Rachel, started visiting more often. She would bring dinner, sit with my daughter, and remind me that I was not alone. She told me something I never forgot. She said, "Olivia, you are not rebuilding because someone left. You are rebuilding because you are still here." Those words stayed with me. They helped me understand that my story was not about what Daniel chose to do. It was about what I chose to do next. Months passed, and slowly, my life began finding a new rhythm. I started walking longer distances. I became more confident taking care of everyday tasks. I created a comfortable home for my daughter and me. It was not the life I had originally planned, but it was a life I was proud of then. One afternoon, I received a message from Daniel. At first, I simply stared at the screen. Seeing his name brought back memories of the person I thought he would always be. I wondered why he was reaching out after so much time had passed. His message was short. I wanted to talk. A part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part of me knew that I needed to understand why he was coming back into my life. I agreed to meet him because I wanted answers, not because I wanted to go back. When Daniel arrived, I noticed something immediately. I looked surprised by the person standing in front of him. I had left behind a woman who was struggling to find her balance. But now he was looking at someone who had learned how to stand again, both physically and emotionally. He did not know what he wanted to say. He did not know that this conversation would become the beginning of another difficult chapter. But I knew one thing. He was no longer the same person he had walked away from. When I agreed to meet Daniel, I told myself I was not looking for answers from him because I needed him back. He needed answers because I had spent months rebuilding my life without understanding why he left when I needed him the most. He wanted to know if the person I trusted for years truly understood the impact of his decision. We met at a quiet coffee shop near my home. He chose a public place because I wanted the conversation to stay calm and simple. When Daniel walked in, I noticed something different about him. He seemed uncertain, almost like he was meeting someone he did not recognize. He looked at me for a moment before sitting down and said, "You look different." He knew what he meant. It was not talking about my appearance. It was talking about the confidence I had gained. The woman sitting across from him was not the same woman who had struggled to stand in the living room months earlier. He had spent so much time focusing on my recovery that I did not realize how much I had changed emotionally too. Daniel started explaining that he had been thinking about everything that happened. He said leaving was not easy for him. He talked about feeling overwhelmed and unsure about the future. He listened quietly because I wanted to understand his perspective. But as he spoke, I realized something important. Daniel was describing how difficult the situation had been for him, but he was not talking about how difficult it had been for me. That difference stayed with me. For months, I had wondered if I was unfair for feeling hurt. He wondered if I should have been more understanding of his struggles. But sitting there, I finally understood that both things could be true. Daniel could have had his own fears and challenges, and I could still be hurt by the way he handled them. Life is complicated. People can struggle and still make choices that affect others deeply. Daniel asked about our daughter. He said he missed being part of her daily life. He could see that he cared about her, and I never wanted to prevent their relationship. My daughter deserved love from both parents. But I also knew that being a parent was about more than showing up when it was convenient. It was about consistency. It was about being present during the difficult moments, not only the easy ones. He told Daniel that I wanted him to have a relationship with our daughter, but it had to be based on responsibility and trust. He nodded, but I could tell the conversation was not going in the direction he expected. Before we left, Daniel said something that surprised me. He told me he had underestimated me. He said he thought I would always need him because of what I had gone through. Hearing that was difficult because it confirmed something I had already started to understand. He had confused my recovery with weakness. He had mistaken a difficult chapter for my entire identity. He did not respond with anger. Instead, I simply told him that needing support during a hard time did not make me weak. Everyone needs help sometimes. Strength is not about never struggling. Strength is about continuing even when life does not go according to plan. After that meeting, I felt a strange sense of closure. He did not get every answer I wanted. He did not hear the perfect apology I once imagined. But I no longer needed those things to move forward. He had spent months waiting for Daniel to understand my pain. Now, I understood that my healing could not depend on someone else's recognition. A few weeks later, I received another message from Daniel. This time, the tone was different. He wanted to discuss arrangements for our daughter and some practical matters. He expected a normal conversation. He expected us to find a way to move forward peacefully. But when I read his message carefully, I realized something had changed. Daniel was not just asking to talk about our future. It was preparing for a conflict I never saw coming. A conflict that would test everything I had rebuilt. Because the next chapter of my life would not only be about recovery. It would be about protecting the life I had worked so hard to create. The message from Daniel changed the feeling I had been carrying for weeks. Until that moment, I believed we were finally moving toward a peaceful arrangement. He thought our conversations about our daughter meant we were both willing to focus on what was best for her. He thought the hardest part of our separation was behind us. But when Daniel asked to discuss legal matters, I felt that familiar uncertainty return. He sat at my kitchen table after putting my daughter to bed, reading the message again and again. He was not afraid of having a conversation. He was not afraid of facing difficult truths. He had already survived one of the hardest chapters of my life. What concerned me was that Daniel seemed to be changing the direction of the story. For months, I had focused on healing. I had focused on becoming stronger, taking care of my daughter, and creating a stable home. He had never tried to make Daniel look bad. He never spoke negatively about him in front of our child. He believed that protecting my daughter's peace was more important than expressing my own disappointment. But now I started wondering if my silence had allowed Daniel to create a version of events that did not match reality. A few days later, Daniel and I spoke again. It sounded more formal this time. The warmth from our previous conversation was gone. He started talking about his concerns and the future arrangements for our daughter. He listened carefully because I wanted to understand what he needed. But then he said something that surprised me. He suggested that maybe I was not capable of handling everything on my own because of my previous health challenges. For a moment, I felt that old pain return. Not because his words changed who I was, but because they reminded me of the person I had worked so hard to stop seeing. The woman who questioned whether she was strong enough. The woman who wondered if her difficult recovery made her less capable. But that woman was no longer controlling my thoughts. He calmly told Daniel that needing time to recover did not mean I was unable to be a good mother. He reminded him that I had spent months caring for our daughter while rebuilding my own strength. I had created routines, managed responsibilities, and provided a loving home. My recovery was not proof that I was weak. It was proof that I could overcome challenges. After that conversation, I decided to prepare myself. Not because I wanted a fight. Not because I wanted revenge. He simply wanted to be ready. He began organizing important documents and records. I collected information about my recovery, my daughter's daily routines, and the responsibilities I had handled since Daniel left. He wanted the truth to speak for itself. During that process, I realized something powerful. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for someone else to protect me. He was protecting myself. He was still the same person who believed in kindness and forgiveness, but I had learned that kindness did not mean ignoring reality. A few weeks later, the official paperwork arrived. Daniel had decided to take the matter further. Seeing those documents sitting on my table felt like another unexpected turning point. He remembered the woman I had been. Months earlier, struggling to take her first steps again. He remembered wondering how I would survive without Daniel beside me. But as I looked at those papers, I realized something important. He had already faced something much harder than a legal disagreement. He had faced losing the person I trusted most and still found a way to rebuild my life. He called my sister Rachel and told her what happened. She listened quietly before saying something that stayed with me. She said, "Olivia, remember who you became when nobody was there to help you. Do not forget that woman." Those words gave me strength. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. He knew there would be difficult conversations and emotional moments. But I also knew I was no longer the person Daniel had left behind. He was a mother. He was a survivor. He was a woman who had learned how to stand again. And this time, I would not let anyone convince me that my strength was something to question. When the legal documents arrived, I expected to feel overwhelmed. He thought I would look at the papers and immediately feel like I was back at the beginning, like the woman who was learning how to walk again and wondering how she would survive without Daniel. But something unexpected happened. He stayed calm. He took a deep breath, placed the documents on my kitchen table, and realized that I was not the same person anymore. The situation was difficult, but I was no longer helpless. He had spent months rebuilding my strength, and now I had to use that same strength in a different way. He knew this was not about proving that Daniel was a bad person. He knew it was not about making him regret his choices. This was about protecting my daughter and making sure the truth was understood. The first thing I did was organize everything carefully. I created a folder with important information about my daughter's daily life. I gathered medical records from my recovery, schedules, communication history, and details about the routines I had created as a mother. He wanted everything to be clear and honest. He did not want emotions to control the situation. He wanted facts to speak for themselves. During this process, I started working with a legal professional who helped me understand the next steps. She reminded me that staying calm was one of my greatest strengths. She told me that many people allow fear to control their decisions during difficult situations, but preparation creates confidence. Those words helped me because I realized that I was not preparing for a battle. I was preparing to tell my story. As I reviewed everything, memories from the past year came back to me. I remembered the nights when my daughter needed me and I had to find the strength to keep going. I remembered practicing my steps in the hallway while holding on to the wall. I remembered the moments when I wanted to give up but looked at my daughter and continued. Those memories reminded me that I had already overcome something much bigger than a legal challenge. One evening, my daughter was playing in the living room while I organized paperwork nearby. She looked at me and asked why I was spending so much time writing things down. I smiled and told her that sometimes adults have important conversations and need to make sure everyone understands the truth. I did not want her to carry the weight of adult problems. I wanted her childhood to remain peaceful. That moment reminded me why I was doing everything I could. This was not about winning against Daniel. It was about creating a stable future for her. A few days later, I received a message from Daniel asking if we could talk before the court date. He agreed because I still believed that honest communication mattered. When we met, Daniel seemed different. He looked more serious than before. He told me he believed he was doing what was right. He said he wanted to be more involved in our daughter's life. He listened carefully. Part of me appreciated that he wanted to reconnect with her. But another part of me remembered the months when I had been carrying everything alone. He told him that I supported his relationship with our daughter, but being a parent required consistency. It required showing up during difficult moments, not only when things became complicated. Daniel became quiet. I do not think he expected me to speak with such confidence. Maybe he still remembered the woman who was struggling after he left. Maybe he did not realize that difficult experiences can transform people. Before we ended the conversation, Daniel said something that stayed with me. He said, "I did not think you would become this strong." He looked at him and realized that was the biggest difference between us. He saw my strength as something surprising. He saw it as something I had earned. As the court date approached, I felt nervous, but I also felt prepared. He was not walking into that room as someone asking to be believed. He was walking in as someone who knew her own truth. He had spent months learning how to stand again. Now I was ready to stand up for the life I had rebuilt. I thought I would feel completely prepared when the day of the court hearing arrived, but the truth was different. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual and sat quietly in my bedroom while the house was still peaceful. My daughter was sleeping, and for a few minutes, I simply listened to the silence. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. I thought about the woman I had been before my recovery. I thought about the woman who believed her future depended on someone else staying beside her. Then I thought about the woman I had become. I had learned how to take care of my daughter. I had learned how to rebuild my confidence. I had learned that difficult moments do not define a person. The choices we make afterward do. Before leaving for court, I looked at my daughter and reminded her that I loved her. I did not explain the details of what was happening because I wanted to protect her from adult concerns. I wanted her to feel safe and loved no matter what happened between Daniel and me. When I arrived at the courthouse, I noticed how different the situation felt compared to the months before. I was nervous, but I was not afraid. I was not there because I wanted revenge. I was there because I wanted honesty. Daniel arrived shortly after. He looked serious and focused. For a moment, I remembered the man I had married. I remembered the promises we made and the years we spent building a life together. It was strange to stand in the same room with someone who had once been my closest partner and now represented a difficult chapter of my life. But I reminded myself that this moment was not about the past. It was about the future. During the hearing, I listened carefully as Daniel explained his concerns. He talked about wanting to be involved in our daughter's life and wanting what he believed was best for her. He understood that a parent wanting a relationship with their child was important. He never wanted to take that away. But I also knew that responsibility was shown through actions. It was not only about what someone wanted. It was about what they had consistently done. When it was my turn to speak, I stayed calm. He did not attack Daniel. He did not exaggerate anything. He simply shared the truth about my experience. He explained my recovery journey, the daily responsibilities I had managed, and the effort I had made to create a stable environment for our daughter. He talked about the challenges I faced and how I continued moving forward even when things were difficult. As I spoke, I realized something important. For months, I had worried that people would only see the version of me from my hardest moments. He worried they would see someone who needed help instead of someone who had overcome challenges. But standing there, I understood that my difficult moments were not something I needed to hide. They were proof of my strength. The most powerful part of the hearing was not a dramatic statement or an unexpected accusation. It was the simple truth. My story did not need to be perfect to be valid. He did not need to pretend the past year had been easy. He only needed to show the reality of what happened. After the hearing ended, I walked outside and took a deep breath. The outcome was important, but I felt something even more meaningful. It felt like I had finally reclaimed my own voice. For so long, I had allowed my circumstances to make me question myself. He had wondered if I was strong enough, capable enough, or prepared enough. But that day reminded me of something I should have known all along. Strength is not about having a life without challenges. Strength is about continuing when challenges arrive. I see. Drove home, I looked at the road ahead and realized that this chapter was not about proving Daniel wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was never as weak as I once believed. He had learned how to walk again. He had learned how to rebuild again. And now, I had learned how to stand for myself. I thought the hardest part of the entire journey would be the day I walked into the courtroom. He believed that moment would determine everything. He believed it would decide whether people saw me as the woman who had struggled or the woman who had rebuilt her life. But after the hearing ended, I realized something important. The courtroom was never the place where I found my strength. He had already found it long before that day. The courtroom only gave me the chance to finally recognize it. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began returning to a new normal. There was no dramatic transformation overnight. There were still responsibilities, difficult conversations, and moments when the past came back to my mind. But something inside me had changed. He no longer woke up wondering if I was enough. He no longer questioned whether I could handle what came next. He had spent so much time trying to prove that I could survive without Daniel that I had forgotten something important. He was not just surviving anymore. He was building a life. My relationship with Daniel became different after the hearing. We were no longer pretending that everything was the same. We had both changed, and our relationship had to adjust to that reality. For the sake of our daughter, I wanted us to communicate respectfully. He did not want her to grow up feeling caught between two parents. She deserved to feel loved by both of us. One afternoon, Daniel came to pick up our daughter and asked if he could speak with me for a few minutes. He agreed. He noticed that his attitude was different from before. There was less defensiveness in his voice. He seemed more willing to listen. Daniel admitted that he had spent a lot of time thinking about everything that happened. He said he realized he had focused so much on his own struggles that he failed to see what I was experiencing. Hearing that was meaningful. But I also understood that words alone could not change the past. Trust is rebuilt through actions. He told him that I appreciated him acknowledging that, but I also needed consistency moving forward. He needed our daughter to have a father who showed up because he wanted to be present, not because he wanted to prove something. Daniel nodded and said he understood. That conversation was not a perfect ending. Real life rarely works that way. But it was an honest beginning. Around the same time, I noticed changes in myself that had nothing to do with Daniel. He started doing things I had put aside for years. He reconnected with friends. He explored interests I had forgotten. He began making plans for the future that were based on what I wanted, not what I thought someone else expected from me. My recovery journey had taught me patience. He had learned that progress could be slow and still be meaningful. The same was true for rebuilding my life. Every small step mattered. My daughter also began noticing that I was happier. Children often sense emotions even when adults do not explain them. She would smile when she saw me walking confidently around the house. She would ask me to play with her, and I no longer worried about whether I was strong enough to keep up. Those simple moments reminded me why I kept going. One evening, I looked through old photos from before everything changed. He saw a younger version of myself who believed she had everything figured out. He smiled because I realized that the woman in those pictures had no idea how strong she would become. She did not know that she would face uncertainty, disappointment, and unexpected challenges. She also did not know that she would discover a strength deeper than anything she had imagined. Daniel once thought my recovery made me dependent. He thought leaving meant I would struggle forever. But he misunderstood something important. My recovery was not the end of my strength. It was the beginning of discovering it. He was not the woman he left behind anymore. I was the woman who learned how to rebuild, protect what mattered, and create a future on my own terms. I used to believe that healing meant returning to the person I was before everything changed. He thought one day I would wake up and feel like the old Olivia Bennett again. But over time, I realized something important. Healing was not about going backward. It was about becoming someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who understood her own value. After everything that happened with Daniel, I stopped measuring my life by what I had lost. He started measuring it by what I had built. My home felt different. The same walls that once reminded me of loneliness now represented something completely different. They represented the place where I had learned how capable I truly was. Every corner of that house carried memories of my journey. The hallway where I practiced walking. The kitchen where I learned how to manage everything on my own. The living room where my daughter and I created new traditions. Those places were no longer reminders of a difficult chapter. They were reminders of my strength. My relationship with my daughter became the most meaningful part of my life. Watching her grow gave me a reason to keep moving forward every day. He wanted her to learn that challenges do not have to define a person. He wanted her to see that kindness and strength could exist together. He wanted her to understand that even when life changes unexpectedly, we still have the ability to choose how we respond. One afternoon, while we were sitting together in the backyard, my daughter asked me why I had worked so hard to get stronger. He smiled and told her that sometimes people have moments in life where they need to learn something new about themselves. He told her that I learned I was stronger than I ever imagined. She looked at me and said, "I knew you could do it." Those simple words meant more than she realized. Children do not always understand adult struggles, but they often understand love better than anyone. She did not see me as someone who had been abandoned. She saw me as her mother. The person who showed up every day. The person who loved her. The person who kept going. As time passed, Daniel also became more consistent in his role as a father. It was not perfect. There were still moments when communication was difficult. There were still reminders of the past. But I learned that moving forward did not mean pretending everything never happened. It meant accepting the past while choosing not to live inside it. I stopped waiting for Daniel to become the person I once hoped he would be. Instead, I accepted him for who he was and focused on the person I wanted to become. That change gave me peace. I also discovered a new confidence in other areas of my life. I started setting goals that had nothing to do with my recovery or my past. I began thinking about my career, my interests, and the dreams I had placed aside while trying to be everything everyone else needed me to be. For years, I had defined myself through my relationships. I was a wife. I was a mother. I was someone who supported others. But I had forgotten that I was also Olivia. A woman with her own dreams, opinions, and hopes. Rediscovering that part of myself was one of the greatest gifts that came from the hardest experience of my life. I realized that losing something important does not always mean the end of a story. Sometimes it creates space for something better to grow. The woman who once wondered if she could stand on her own was now building a future with confidence. I still had difficult days. I still had moments when memories returned. But those moments no longer controlled me. They were simply reminders of how far I had come. I had learned how to walk again, but more importantly, I had learned how to move forward. And as I looked at the life I had created, I finally understood something I wish I had known from the beginning. My strength was never something someone else gave me. It was something I discovered within myself. I used to think the ending of my story would be the day everything changed. I thought the most important moment would be the day Daniel left, the day I received the legal documents, or the day I walked into the courtroom. But now, looking back, I understand that those moments were not endings. They were turning points. The real ending was the moment I finally stopped seeing myself through the eyes of someone who had chosen to leave. For a long time, I carried questions that had no easy answers. I wondered why Daniel walked away when I needed him most. I wondered if I had done something differently, maybe things would have turned out another way. I wondered if my recovery had changed the way he saw me. But eventually, I learned that spending my life searching for answers from someone else would only keep me trapped in the past. My future could not depend on Daniel understanding my pain. My future depended on me understanding my own worth. Years later, I still remember the woman I was during those difficult months. I remember the uncertainty, the frustration, and the moments when taking one simple step felt like a major achievement. I remember looking at my daughter and promising myself that I would keep trying, no matter how difficult the road became. At the time, I thought I was fighting to get back to my old life. I did not realize I was creating a completely new one. My daughter grew older, and watching her become a kind and thoughtful person became one of my greatest joys. She knew that life was not always perfect, but she also knew that love could remain strong through challenges. She never saw me as someone who had been left behind. She saw me as her mother, the person who showed up every day. That was the greatest reminder that my struggles had a purpose. Daniel and I eventually reached a place where we could communicate with respect. We were not the same people we had been when we first met. The experiences we went through changed both of us. I do not know if Daniel fully understands the impact of his choices, and I no longer need him to. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant releasing the weight I had been carrying. It meant accepting that some people may disappoint us, but their choices do not have to determine our future. I learned that strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength is waking up every morning and choosing to continue. Sometimes strength is rebuilding quietly when nobody is watching. Sometimes strength is looking at everything that changed and still believing that something good can come next. My life today is not the life I originally planned. But it is a life I appreciate deeply. I have a home filled with love. I have a daughter who reminds me every day what truly matters. I have confidence that came from overcoming challenges I once thought I could not survive. If I could speak to the woman I was during those first days of recovery, I would tell her something simple. I would tell her that she does not know yet how strong she will become. I would tell her that the moments that feel like they are breaking her are actually building her. I would tell her that losing someone does not mean losing herself. The greatest lesson I learned was not about Daniel leaving. It was about me staying. Staying committed to my daughter. Staying committed to my healing. Staying committed to becoming the person I was always meant to be. I spent months learning how to walk again, but the most important journey was learning how to stand confidently in my own life. And now, when I look back, I do not see a woman who was abandoned. I see a woman who discovered her strength, protected what mattered most, and created a future that belonged to her.